Well, welcome everyone. I am Jill Kickle. I'm the acting director of the Brittingham Social Enterprise Lab. And welcome again to another one of our Jacobson Family Sustainable Impact lecture series. I am so delighted that this topic, it's coming around and around. This year we are celebrating out of the Brittingham Social Enterprise Lab and also with IMD over in Lausanne, Switzerland. We're celebrating our 20th annual Social Entrepreneurship Conference. And the reason why I'm mentioning that, it's next month, is that several of our topics have always been on measuring impact. In fact, for 4 straight years at NYU Stern, it was all on measuring impact and strategies of how to measure, how to assess, how to communicate. And even in the words of Jason Sal, an early leader in the field for mission measurement, how do you sell your impact? So I'm really delighted about this lecture series. It really couldn't be without, we can't do this without the support of the Jacobson family. And Libby and Arthur, thank you so much for helping us and supporting us along the way. I would like to now turn this over to Emily Kane Miller, who is a founder and CEO of Ethos Giving, who will kick us off and kick the panel off. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Jill. We're so excited to be here and have a stellar panel to talk about a topic near and dear to all of our hearts, I know, on this panel, and also for all of you on the Zoom. Just quickly, as an impact practitioner with over 20 years under her belt, I often get this question. It ranges from being earnest to being snarky and everything in between, and really delighted to dig into how we've seen impact measurement evolve and how we've seen this move from something that really is hypothetical to having a tremendous amount of efficacy, expertise, and teeth to it. So I'd love for our panelists to share their coordinates and also what roots them in this work. Sara, if I could hand the microphone to you.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Emily. Well, what roots me in this work is something that I think a lot of people who get involved in impact measurement and management professionally share, and that is some kind of experience where we were working for a social purpose organization or an impact investment fund or some other setting where there was a clear mandate to try to do something to help a certain problem get better. And there was difficulty aligning the funding with what was actually happening on the ground that was causing good things to happen. And so what I experienced myself when I was an early person getting involved in what became known as social entrepreneurship, this was in Chicago in the mid-90s, I found that although what we were doing, which was running a small after-school social purpose, social enterprise business with teenagers who were earning money while doing design work for corporate customers who would pay to get a t-shirt made with a special logo or a special design on it that we would then outsource the mass production onto t-shirts of. They would learn how you run a small business, why they needed to show up on time, how to work as a team, how to calculate tax on a sale. And we were working together, rowing together to break even as a company, so we would never need any more grant money. But the only kind of funders we had typically gave for 1 year at a time. And the one that would fund for more than 1 year at a time wanted us to grow our impact. But unfortunately to them, that meant double the number of people walking in the door with no regard for what that would mean for any one of their experience of social value and how they were building their own capacity. And certainly without increasing our staff capacity to do that, which was kind of crazy. Like, why would anyone think you can just double the true social value that people are experiencing in their lives when you don't change anything else to support that? That was a long time ago, but something that keeps me striving to build on what has happened in this field over the last 25, 30 years since then is knowing that we have so many people out there now who do have a greater understanding of what it takes to create real social value and social impact in people's lives. But there's still a disconnect in the conversation with money and in tying the system together in a much more attuned, sensitive way. So I look forward to digging into this topic more with you all.
100%. And we'll really dig into measuring what matters, right? Because to your point, not all metrics are created equal. Amazing. Stefano, if you could share your coordinates and your credentials, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me here. I'll start with my credentials. I split my time between USC. I'm an adjunct professor of entrepreneurship and a research fellow at the Brittingham Social Enterprise Lab. And I'm also affiliated with the doctoral program here at the Wharton School. So hello from Philadelphia tonight. A little bit about a story. I mean, building off of the amazing things that so many leaders in the field like Sara have accomplished, what excites me is, of course, the potential for innovation that social entrepreneurship has unlocked, that we're really going so much further than we were able to 20, 30 years ago when we were tied to just philanthropic funding and the model of philanthropy. So what excites me, I think, is the fact that we are reinventing almost every day the way we change lives and the system that reaches so many people around the world. And it's incredibly important for us to actually keep track of what it is that we do, but also to tell our stories to those who provide the funding, who are perhaps not part of the story yet, but also to keep ourselves accountable to the people that we help and to make sure that we never get too ahead of ourselves. So that's kind of what brings me in my research, in my academic research, and formerly in another life as a former impact investor. What keeps me excited is making sure that we deliver on our promises to the people that have come to trust us, to work with us, and to ensure that we're able to create social impact as a team.
Amazing. And we'll get into all of this lived experience. And just to add, in my own working life, I've been in-house. I now have a firm that supports corporations and family foundations, all of whom are deploying generosity in all sorts of ways that range from cash to political giving to impact investment to real estate deployment and the question that all of them are asking is, what matters the most? We want to be generous. What's the best way for us to deploy these resources effectively? And so we've actually, for our clients, developed a system called Ethos tracking that helps to do that management and measurement in a more effective way. So between the three of us, I think there's a tremendous amount of working knowledge and very excited to dig in. So without further ado, I want to step back a moment. I think everybody who signed up for this probably did so because there were question marks around impact measurement and how it gets done. This is not something that has a real standardization checkbox asked and answered. There's a lot of open space, right? Blue ocean, and with that comes skepticism. If people don't have a proof positive that something exists and what the black letter law is, there can often be naysayers. So I'd love to start us off. Pretend that you're sitting and having a conversation across from somebody that says impact measurement, that's not a real thing. Tell us what your elevator pitch is, your stump speech is, to really set that person straight and to say this is real, this is here, and impact measurement is something that is really got a science behind it. Stefano, if you don't mind taking us to that first, that would be great.
Absolutely. Well, I would have to, of course, respectfully disagree. I think that social impact is real. And if you speak to any beneficiary out there, if you've been in the field for just a minute, you'll be able to realize that what we do is indeed real. I think some of the confusion comes not really from the fact that we don't believe in social impact, but that we don't believe it can be measured. To that, I'd say it's actually a little bit of the opposite, that if we have a problem in the field, it's that there are too many ways of measuring social impact, that it is such a heterogeneous concept that we can really take it hundreds of different directions. So I'd say, if you're interested in social impact measurement, really clarify what it means to you, what you're looking for, and then go out there and seek the methodology, because can guarantee you that it exists, that speaks to what you're looking for. And then through that, you'll be able to methodically measure the social impact that's being created out there.
Amazing. And just because I know there's so many people who are nodding their heads around that cacophony, right? I've often called it the Wild West. Not that all systems or metrics work for everything, but do you have one or two just off the top that you think are good models of how social impact can be measured that you would point somebody to who's looking to do research or looking to, sort of understand what good looks like in this panoply of metrics and tools?
Sure. I think very briefly, there are two dominant ways of measuring impact. There's the qualitative way and the quantitative way. To the quantitative way, there's a lot of work done on the SROI, the social return on investment. The thesis of that is that, embracing the heterogeneity, what we do is we can kind of approximate the dollar value of the social impact being created and then keep our accounting traditionally by working with dollars and cents. If you go qualitatively, there's different ways to approach it. The IRIS metrics, the IRIS Plus metrics that have been developed through GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, have gained a lot of currency, the Global Reporting Index as well. Those would be the three, I'd argue, the top most prevalent ways of measuring impact.
Incredibly, incredibly helpful. Sara, same question. You're sitting across from a skeptic. What's your stump speech?
Well, I mean, the question is, what can we measure social impact? I agree with you, Stefano. I think it really comes down to how can we measure social impact? So another way of thinking through what are we trying to do here is, are we trying to gauge something that's important to me personally that I value, like my quality of my relationships with my loved ones, or the potential I feel in myself when I wake up in the morning at feeling like I can make things happen, or maybe I don't feel like that. That is very subjective, very personal. Sometimes that feels like, how could you ever measure that unless it was just your own read today? And that might change from day to day or even hour to hour, depending on whether you just dropped a hammer on your foot or not. Like that is the part where people feel like it's just so impossibly subjective and therefore illegitimate if they have learned that the only things that you can actually measure have to be objectively verifiable and quantitative. But I will say that you actually, that can be measured. It can even be quantified, and we could get into that. But acknowledging that there is some social value that is totally personally determined and very subjective. So the measure would be one's own judgment. And then we go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is this a thing that society deems to be important? And how would society measure this kind of in general? And that's really where some of the major standards like Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, or B-Lab originally started from. They were thinking about, okay, what is social responsibility for a company, even if it's a huge multinational? And how would you begin to get your arms around what that looks like? And they got hundreds of people who were well informed about what companies do and what social and environmental issues arise. And they sat them down and they said, what are the things that matter, so that we can come up with a kind of the definitive set of considerations, and then just put that in front of any company and they have to answer that checklist. That's a very different paradigm for a very different use case. And that is part of this world that we're talking about. So again, I think it comes down to, what are you trying to accomplish? And who's affected by what you're doing? And how would you know how they're affected? And most often, the bottom line of that is you ask them, how have you been affected? And how important was that to you? That's the crux of the principles that I've just put a note to in the chat as well.
Amazing. And I think, just to underscore, so much of this is about really digging in and communicating, whether that's an internal team to an internal team, or whether you're, looking at it from a research perspective. This is not hands-off work. It's dig in work, right? And so really understanding, what are our objectives? Who are we trying to connect with? And actually speaking with them and asking the relevant questions is key. And I know that sounds obvious, but so often that's where this work misses. Like, we're going to come in, we have a preconceived notion of what framework we're applying, you're welcome, may not actually meet the goal because we didn't ask the questions on the front end. And the other thing, while it can, I know from a listener's perspective, feel overwhelming that there's so much, what I would say is, sort of to Stefano's point, there's a lid for every pot, and that's actually kind of freeing, right? That there is an application that can be supported, or at least a learning that you can bring in for new conversations within your organization. And no need to reinvent the wheel, because there are so many wheels. So let's dig into some specific wheels, as it were. Sara, I'm going to ask you first. You know, they often say, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so what we want to do in this next question is really bring our audience into a real world application of impact measurement. What questions were you trying to answer? How did you go about thinking about, KPIs, metrics, et cetera? And what did the work look like that helped you succeed in those goals?
Sure. Well, I'll give two quick examples that that kind of get at two different points on the capital intentions spectrum, from risk-adjusted market rates of return in a private equity fund who also has a very long-term investment horizon, and the latitude that comes with having a single LP who's totally mission aligned. And then things that are designed to achieve a development objective. In the case, I'll give peace and security in high conflict zone communities. So in the first case, we were engaged by a venture fund, a private equity fund that invests not only directly in portfolio companies in the venture space, but also in funds. So they're holding a number of venture funds as well as direct investments. And their mandate is to ensure that their investments enhance well-being for the people who are affected by their investments, while also performing well as investments in the venture space. So they needed somebody who could help them figure out how to do that. They are holding effectively, either through direct investments or fund of funds, hundreds of companies, but they are in a personal relationship directly with their investees, so they can get more under the hood than you might be able to do in the context of a public equity fund of some huge size. So what we started with is we thought about, okay, how is well-being or happiness defined? And this fund, by the way, is named Happiness Capital. So they're not messing around. They're based in Hong Kong, and they're a typical venture fund size. But they define the concept of happiness in a way that I think is a little broader than we would in the United States. They're thinking of it the way you would define a word in Chinese that means happiness when translated, but it includes sustainability from an environmental point of view as well. So we looked into how has anyone in the world who's thought a lot about this figured out what goes into happiness, and we found the OECD Well-Being Index. And we found the PERMA framework, which is more of a psychological, internal subjective state kind of paradigm. And we built out a way of gauging through both desk-based research, interviews with the management teams of these companies, and then in 10% of the companies so far, a deep dive into customers' experiences using the research firm 60 Decibels. So between all of those data sources and this framework that we've designed that's aligned with these existing ways of gauging happiness, we've created a system that this fund can use to just think it through. What effect are they having on all the different stakeholders, not just the equity owners who are the parties to the transaction, right? Mm. So that's one approach. The other is we did some social return on investment, like you mentioned, Stefano, work in the context of investments that have been made by development agencies, USAID in particular, in a number of organizations working in high conflict zones. And in particular, this was in Kenya. We're also now doing another project with the same partner, AMREF, who works in South Sudan and many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And we investigated what interventions these different organizations that had received funding had done to try to cultivate peace and reduce conflict in places that are prone to those issues. And what we did is we used the social return on investment process of talking with the stakeholders who are affected, first qualitatively, to find out what had changed for them as a result of these interventions. Was it good or bad? And how could they tell it had changed? And how important was it to them? Then we codified those answers into a quantitative survey of each of these stakeholder groups and conducted the analysis that flows along using the SROI methodology that Social Value International provides, which allows you to gauge social impact in any context. It's not a set of preset measures, it's a set of principles you work through to figure out what you have here, the set of judgments that you need to work through. So those are two different approaches, but I think at the end, both of them are about enabling well-being. Both of them are about accountability to the stakeholders who are actually being affected by what we are doing. And hopefully, although this is by no means guaranteed, hopefully the answers that they've gleaned by engaging in these exercises will be reflected on by the people deploying the money to help them make more informed judgments about where they can do the most good and really how to co-design what they're investing in with the people who are affected, because those are the people and the people on the ground who really know what's working and what's not. So if they really, it can be an enabling tool to really set the stage for a partnership. And that's how you create social impact.
I love the word partnership, and I just want to double click on that, Sarah, quickly. You know, it sounds like you mentioned co-designing, you mentioned interviewing folks internally and externally, you mentioned sort of bringing in multiple stakeholders and crafting the KPIs and metrics with the table around you. For those on this call who may not be able to bring a consultant in, or may not be able to afford sort of like a full stack expertise, which you and your firm bring, which is amazing. I think to me, that's what I pulled out, which is the, where the rubber meets the road. Can you just talk us through a little bit how, if there's a more sort of bare bones approach, or sort of like a way that you could imagine engaging stakeholders that wouldn't necessarily require additional resources if there's an organization that's just not there yet, or for whatever reason cannot get there? Like, what's kind of your best advice for a non-expert practitioner to jump in and really get this right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, recognizing that a practitioner probably, hopefully, has quite a lot of lived experience and a connection to people with lived experience of what the issues are. So figuring out what makes sense to try to cause to happen can be it may not be a formally researched undertaking, but there's a lot of collective wisdom that is informing the decision about that. And I wouldn't discount that. I definitely always think like looking to see who else is doing what and learning from that first before you really get going, or periodically as you're going, is good. So do that as much as you can. But let's assume that you're doing what you're doing because you know for some reason this is going to help, and that reason is good. Then figuring out what is your purpose as an organization or with this intervention, like what are you trying to make happen, first of all, and then who is affected by what you're doing, not just who you know that's affected, but talk to the people you're working with and find out from them who else is affected by this. And just sitting down and having that reflection is one basic step toward becoming more aware of the relationships that either are going to enable what you're doing to succeed because you can work together to figure out how to make it happen, or they're potentially going to undermine your success because actually you haven't thought about the fact that you're affecting this other group of people and they're not excited about what you're doing, right? You need to know that. So figuring the stakeholders out first is step one, always. And then talking to them about how are they affected, or how could they be affected if you do this thing. Talk to them. It's awkward, and humans don't always like to talk to strangers, but try to get brave about it and do it. And that will serve multiple purposes because it'll help inform what you're trying to do to make it better. It'll make them aware of you and what you're doing. And, if they hear that you're genuinely interested in having a good effect in this particular way that would benefit them, they become an ally to you. If you've shown the respect to take the time to connect with them at a human level and find out what's going on for you and how could this help, maybe, or is it helping, or is it not? And have a candid, open conversation about that that's not judgmental, they become on your side.
Mm-hmm.
Like more often than not, right? Like that's genuinely kind of a human instinct to try to help you. So don't be afraid of it. And also don't take it personally. I like learn deep breathing techniques, because we all need to be less personal about this stuff. And it's hard because a lot of people who care, who are empathetic, do tend to take things personally. And I speak from experience. But like learning how to gain some objectivity as you hear whatever they're saying is a really good skill as well for an impact professional.
Such sage advice. And I would also just add, whether this is DIY or working with a bona fide firm, going back, and to the extent that it's appropriate and available, sharing results, end product, follow through videos. I mean, I think everything that you just shared, yes, truly the best advice. I hope everybody wrote it down. The place where we see this falling down, where I see this falling down, is, hey, where was that person who was so lovely 4 months ago? We had the best experience, and I think the thing is done, but do you know what actually came of it? So, really sort of
I totally agree. Emily, I'm really glad you mentioned that. That is cool. The financial resource providers are the enablers or the preventers of that.
Yes.
I just want to say that, because I feel like it's hard for us to speak truth to money when it's maybe inconvenient for the money to hear it. It maybe implies that they could do something differently and better. And if we want their money again, it's so hard to say that. But the reason that a lot of times the follow-up doesn't happen is because the money is not providing a way for that to happen, because people only have so much time in the day. So I think we've got to all figure out, how do we open up more of an objective conversation with the money side of the equation about what does it really take to sustain good things that are happening and to learn better from what's not working. And it takes slight tweaks to the way the money is structured.
Amazing. Well, maybe we'll get into that in Q&A, or maybe there'll be another panel, but I want Stefano to have you sort of take us back to the question, which is, practical lived experience. Help us walk in your shoes to understand what you were trying to tackle, how you built it, and how you made sure that it worked as it related to impact measurement.
Sure. I think it's interesting, in the shoes that I've worn from the impact investing side and from the academic perspective, it's very tempting to separate out, to parcel out the components of social entrepreneurs. Specifically, right, the promise and peril of social entrepreneurship is the ability to create multiple outcomes, to create financial outcomes, profits, and purpose. And I think that it's very tempting to separate those things and kind of look at the profit statement and then look at the impact. And what the research finds is that we're very much guilty of doing that there's a threshold of profitability that has to be reached before an impact investor wants to talk about your impact. So it very much skews towards the profit before the purpose. But I want to say that my experience on the field working with social entrepreneurs and learning from them, I think there was an aha moment where I was speaking with a good friend, a former student and a good friend of mine, Matteo Abascal, who's the CEO of Beamlink, and he's a graduate of our MSSC program. He's done widely successful work. He's raised millions of dollars. And I posed the question to him about, how do you measure social impact? How do you balance purpose and profits? This is the million-dollar question that investors want to know and academics want to know. And what he told me was that the way I think about it is that if I'm not creating purpose, I can't make a profit. That the entire reason my company exists is to create purpose. And if that isn't happening, I know, because I'm not making money either. So I think that's an interesting kind of light bulb moment for myself, and it's shaped a bit of the research trajectory that I've taken, which is you can't really separate those two. And there's a million different ways you can cut up the social impact pie, but when you come back to the practitioner perspective, when you come back to outcomes, it's important to put those pieces back together and really consider what is the essence of social entrepreneurship? It's purpose and profits. And I think a lot of that goes back to a lot of the things that people can develop in the first stages of entrepreneurship, right? I think we were just talking, right, Sara was just talking about what it would be like when you have to reach out to stakeholders who are not involved. If you're a social enterprise who works with beneficiaries intimately and you have an open dialogue and an impact investor wants to know about that, it's very easy. If you don't have that door, trying to create that from scratch, reaching out, scrambling to put this together is very difficult. It's costly in the long term. So I'd say think about that from the get-go. And I know I'm kind of hinting at some of the next questions we'll talk about, but really think about the and between purpose and profits and not just one or the other.
And I think, objectivity, measurement helps to set that tone for you. So I love, the Mateo example and everything that you just shared sounds phenomenal. And also, if you don't have a P&L, right? Like if there isn't a spreadsheet you can go to with data, it's very hard to benchmark that without it moving into something that's just so cumbersome, right? So I think in all of this conversation, having something that you set as an organization that you can utilize as an objective standard is critical if you're going to have that marriage of purpose and profit. And I think you found the title for your next paper. It was a very, very good alliteration. Amazing. So just quick housekeeping. We are moving into our final official question, and I'm going to be shifting into Q&A shortly. If anybody has questions that they're interested in the panelists responding to, please start sharing them with us, and we will try to get to as many as possible in about 10 minutes. All right. So this final question, obviously the audience who is on this Zoom has a lot of folks who are in school, grad school, early career. And we really want to sort of take it back to the advice that you would give, maybe not your college self, because as we've shared, this work has evolved so much, but if your college self existed in today's ecosystem, what would your advice to that version of your college self be? And sort of secondarily, knowing that as an early career professional, you may not have 100% of the power. You probably won't have 100% of the power as it relates to decision-making. In addition to advice, what would be some early career opportunities that you would see as ways to help organizations bridge into impact measurement successfully when you don't necessarily hold all the cards? How would you use your role as an early career professional to stoke this within your career? So, Sara, we'll kick it back to you if that's okay.
Sure. If you don't mind putting those questions in the chat, that would be helpful. So just to start with the last first, I would say that there's trainings that you can do that are low cost and pretty quick. Social Value International in a variety of time zones, just on the basics of what underpins an understanding of social value, social impact, but thinking about it, not just what changed, but did it matter or not? And like, how much did it matter? To whom? That's the valuation question. So learning about social impact, but then also the practical angle of how important it was is what you get from the valuation angle on it. So I would definitely recommend starting there. If you are interested in coming at these topics from an impact investor point of view as well, and I would not say instead, but as well, I would add to that the Impact Frontiers work. Impact Frontiers has thought about how you can balance between profit making and impact, especially if you have a particular purpose. And there's a great paper called The Efficient Impact Frontier by Mike McCrellis that talks about that concept. And then Impact Frontiers has a bunch of resources on their website, which are aligned, by the way, as is Social Value International, with the norms that the Impact Management Project arrived at through a huge stakeholder engagement process across the impact investing space to arrive at shared norms of what do we mean when we say the word impact? How can you tell? What are you actually looking for? So those two resources are really excellent. And if you're interested in coming in the door through the SDG lens, SDG Impact Standards also has trainings and written material that you can find. If you Google SDG Impact Standards, you will find it. So all of those, I think, are really valuable starting places, and I would encourage everybody to take those classes or read that stuff. Advice to the college self. Maybe I could turn something over to Stefano while I think about that.
Absolutely. Okay. Stefano, if you could sit across from your, 21-year-old self who exists in 2024, we're going to move the space-time continuum. What would you say to that person if they said, what should I do now, early career, to prepare myself for all of the impact work that I hope to do?
Well, I think when I was 21, I was starting an impact investing firm with some friends that has done well without me, I'll add. Um, my argument would be, don't be in too much of a rush. I think I was kind of part of that startup generation where we really believed that, we were running out of time and we had to act now. And I think that's not necessarily the case. I think there's a lot of it's much easier to wait and learn and do your enterprise right than to just get going on the road and make some mistakes. And this particularly speaks to impact measurement. I think a lot of people forget in the excitement to create change that they have to keep track of their change. And if they don't build that into their business from day one, they don't at least have some kind of company culture of accountability, of tracking, or some expertise in that, it becomes very difficult to backtrack and figure that out. So I'd say, take time to learn. And this certainly it's a very exciting field. It moves quickly, and it's helpful to be tied to the college campus. A lot of great insights are happening here. So go back to school. I'll plug the USC, the MSSC program, which I'm a part of, is a fantastic opportunity to explore these things, as well as the MSCI program for our more traditional entrepreneurs. Learn as much as you can. Yeah, I think that's kind of how I would touch on the two bases, is that you certainly don't be afraid to ask questions as well. And I think this speaks to our youth is our power. I think a lot of people are very generous with their time if you go to them with the attitude of wanting to learn rather than wanting to, bargain with them or get something out of them. So don't underestimate the goodwill that peppers this field. I think we're all here because we want to make a difference and we want to change the world. And that means that we generally attract better, a better set of people than usual. So really take advantage of that and foster that community. And of course, remember to give back to it when you can.
Amazing. And if you could tie one reminder around your wrist, right? Because you said don't do everything at once. The day is long. Take your time. What would be your first move, knowing that you can't build out this practice all in one day? Going back to this question of early career, maybe early entrepreneur, it's your first company that you're starting, or you're beginning in an industry to learn it. What's the one thing that you would recommend people do if they're really focused on impact measurement and thinking about this work as they're getting started or as they're new to an organization?
I'm a big proponent of the concept of servant leadership. So I'd say serve before you lead. I think a lot of people have a preconceived notion of what they want to do for people, but they haven't actually figured out if the people want it done for them. So I'd say before you get out there, start your business and, figure out how well you're doing, spend time in the field, spend time with the people you want to work with, understand the change, your proposition for change, and really use that as a learning experience. And at some point, you'll figure it out. You'll find your niche. And you'll also understand how to keep track of your impact and how to measure that. And of course, it's a narrative, right? How to tell that story to stakeholders, to investors, to people who support you. But it becomes very evident, I think, in the field for people who have spent time with their beneficiaries and people who maybe have just read about a problem and want to jump into it. So, serve, serve, serve.
Amazing. Sarah, let's get you in the DeLorean and bring you back to your college self who exists in 2024. What would you say?
That's hilarious that it's a DeLorean still. I was just seeing a Tesla truck go by, and every time I see it, I'm like, is that somehow like a graphic that has just appeared in the time space void?
I'm dating myself. Maybe, the Tesla was a better vehicle.
I think I'd rather be in a DeLorean than a Tesla truck. But so, I totally resonate with what you're saying, Stefano, about serve first and then lead. I think that's great wisdom. Absolutely. And the thing that I was thinking I would have told my college self would be, so it's tricky when you have an inkling inside about something that really matters to you, that you want to manifest, how to nurture it without it getting swamped by noise from around you, that is not easy to do, right? And especially like if you're interested in market failures and addressing them, there's not easy answers. And a lot of the advice that you can get might dissuade you from trying. So I definitely do think that listening to people that you are interested in, being of service to is critical. But I also think listening to yourself is critical. Learn how to listen to yourself would be one thing that I would suggest, in addition to what Stefano has said about seek to serve first before you try to lead. The other thing that I would have said to myself is that I think my path would have been easier if I had recognized that maybe I could be of service to people by convening them and enabling them to figure out some answers to the questions that they all needed an answer to, then they didn't have it. But if I had created space for the people that I think had ideas about what the answers might be and held that space for them to figure it out, that would have been a quicker path to what the ultimate solution was, and an easier path, and probably a more fun and more lucrative path as well. So I would have done that more than I did. And interestingly, I'm just reflecting on the fact that I happened to be about to do that without realizing that is also the advice I would have given myself as a college student about the problem.
I was gonna say,
yeah,
it sounds like a little bit what we discussed earlier in the conversation. So I feel like you got there. They ultimately.
Finally, yeah, I'm a kind of a slow bloomer, but yeah, like we're just involved in an effort to try to convene people who've got a depth now of experience in impact investing and impact management and systems innovation to interrogate, okay, what's working and where are we stuck and why do we still see big needles moving in the wrong direction on the big social and environmental problems? What haven't we cracked yet? And let's target some attention on that and see what solutions we can come up with together to that, because we have so much going for us now. There's so much that's working and there's so much potential, but it doesn't look like it to the casual observer. So what do we need to do? And we need to get better results, bigger, better, faster results. And like, how are we going to do that? So that's going to be through essentially holding space for the smart people to figure out the answers to that, rather than trying to come up with the answer and then presenting it, which is what I did when I was younger. That was not smart.
Critical questions. And I hope, apropos to earlier conversation also, that you are able to share some gleanings from that kind of more broadly, because I'm certainly curious.
Well, anybody who's interested in that conversation should, comment in the chat on my LinkedIn, because all are welcome. Anybody who's like, yes, I have opinions about this at this point, having now worked in this space for a while, or anybody who's just really interested in that process, we would love to hear from you.
Amazing. So just looking at the Q&A, we're going to start bringing some responses into questions that we're getting. The first one that we have, and one that I certainly get a lot, I'm sure you do as well, is AI. How are we thinking about artificial intelligence as it relates to impact measurement? And how is it affecting the work that you all are doing on a daily basis, maybe today, and perhaps, where you see it going, if that's also relevant? Happy to have either of you take first bat.
Stefano, would you like to comment?
Sure.
On the AI question?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think it's the question of the year. So thank you, I think, Misha, for proposing that. It's certainly, I mean, AI is a powerful tool, but I think it's just that. It's a tool. So we really have to understand what the tool can accomplish and what we want it to accomplish. I think one of the most promising aspects of AI and using AI in the age of social entrepreneurship is that it reduces a lot of the workload, or kind of a lot of the repetitive workload around data collection and data analysis that scares entrepreneurs. It's a tool set that is not necessarily convergent with entrepreneurial leadership. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs just kind of avoid the topic. But I hope that we can start to see AI as a really helpful companion tool to keeping track of all these things that, the human being can't really keep track of, in order to collectively measure impact over time, keep track of metrics and focus. That being said, AI is a tool, so you have to tell it what you'd like it to do. So that's still the impetus is still on the entrepreneur to direct AI. So I think even more than ever, it's important for you, the entrepreneur, to really understand what your theory of change is, what your impact is, and how to measure it. Because if you measure the wrong thing, or you measure something that isn't necessarily helpful, you're going to measure it really well with AI. And you're going to find that if you just follow the data, it's going to take you places that you didn't intend to go. And that might result in drifting away from your social mission. It might, make some redundancies in your business. It could take you down some difficult paths. So definitely being the leader that AI needs to be your helpful companion is important, but also it's exciting. So play with it, get familiar with it. It's the future, whether or not you like it. So, it's here to stay.
Hmm.
Sarah,
Yeah,
and
I would just chime in and add that we've been looking into and trying to get up the learning curve on AI. And the bottom line is everyone who would like to see the world, being more just needs to be in the AI conversation. The attentiveness to how people are being affected by investments or by any kind of activity. We need to be seeing into the data set that AI is learning from. We need to be weighing in the conversations about the direction AI should go and the governance of it. Do not hold back. Do not wait. Do it now. And the way to start playing with it is just go to OpenAI or whatever platform that has some interface that's enabled by AI, and start telling it to answer you a question that you already know the answer to. And then you'll learn how it thinks a little bit by seeing how it answers the question. And you'll start to pick up on where does its awareness leave off? Where does it seem to lean toward a certain type of answer or a certain type of source that may not be all that's out there that you are aware of? And you'll start to begin to have a way to see where you could use it in your own work. Be aware that if you enter data into ChatGPT, it's there forever. So don't enter your social security number or that of other people.
I was gonna say, or your
their-
partners, right? Your partner's data, like you need to be sensitive. Yeah.
yeah. Be thoughtful about what's going in there. I think they do, actually, I think ChatGPT has a decent amount of protections on that, but I wouldn't assume that it is going to be protected. And I think also that we need to, as you said, Stefano, just think of it as a tool. It's not the end all be all. And I know that there's talk about general intelligence, but remember that the original definition of general intelligence was what underpinned some very nasty behaviors in human history. The whole invention of IQ was used ultimately to justify some of the atrocities during the Holocaust. IQ has also been a useful construct. So none of these tools are benign or malevolent. They will do what we tell them to do. And so we have to make sure that our sense of what is ethical pervades the way they are used. And that is not something the AI is going to do all by itself. So same with impact measurement. You can teach Wall Street to do SROI analysis. It probably will skip. So, we may work hard to prevent this from happening, but it's more convenient to skip the part about talking to actual stakeholders, right? It's quicker and cheaper to skip that, even though that's the most critical part. So Wall Street may come in and try to figure out what its social impact is using artificial intelligence tools, And if if it does that, there's not necessarily a great attention to whether people are better off as a result of that or worse off, unless somebody at the reins is making it do that. So we've got to make sure that no matter how black box-ish the black box might get, we are really holding those reins close to the question of, is this in service of humanity or is it not? And if it's not, let's not enable it to continue. So that's why, please weigh in and be involved in this.
Amazing. So I'm going to ask one more meaty question. We're going to then hit lightning round because there's a number of sort of good topics that I want to dive into. But before we do, there's a question here from Doreen about private investors and whether they have knowledge about the science behind impact or how impact works or how it's measured. And I think, Sara, just given your expertise, would love to answer that question. As it relates to investors, or really as it relates to any key constituent, right, that you're bringing data back to. How do you think about expertise, and how do you think about working with partners to understand their expertise before you embark, so that everybody's set up for success?
That's such an interesting question. I think, there needs to be clearer professional standards of what you need to know before you can claim to be an impact investor, or really any kind of professional investor nowadays. You need to know what impact is. And those standards are not clear yet. So I think we have work to do as a whole industry to make it clear. There's a set of concepts that everybody needs to get, grounded in, so that there can be healthy and productive conversations about what even is expertise on a given topic. And there's a point where some of the judgments need to be made that are personal, and some require some, domain specific expertise. So that's going to vary on a case-by-case basis. But I think the awareness that one person probably isn't going to know everything there is, it's not possible anymore for one investor as a human being to know all the issues that are going to come up, and to figure out when do you need to call on someone with more specialized expertise is a judgment that needs to be cultivated. The sort of default position always, I would say, is talk to the people who are living the issue, because they have a lifetime of expertise in whatever that is. And so if you don't know where to find the right expert, go to them.
Amazing. Stefano, anything to add on?
Yeah, very quickly, I think there's something to learn about the recent downfall of ESG. And we have a lot of lessons to learn in this field lest we go down the same path. And I think one of the reasons why ESG has faltered so quickly is that it meant too many things to too many people. And I think when you look at the field of social impact measurement, you may see some parallels. So my advice to navigating that is that it's a market. There are investors that prioritize different things, that understand different things. It's really up to you to find your team, right? Because in the ideal world, an investor isn't just giving you money and walking away. They're your partner. They're here to help you. Find your person, find someone who speaks the language you do, because they're out there. Talk to your fellow entrepreneurs, find the sources, and it's really worth it at the end when you're working with someone who understands, and then you're not having to convince them about your viewpoint every step of the way, because that does happen, and then you do lose momentum.
Yeah, life can be too short. All right, lightning round, as lightning as we can get, knowing that there's so much to say, but lightning-ish. We had a question here about struggle. Could you share an example or just stumbling blocks that you have seen around impact, and what you would avoid if you could? Stefano, Stefano, do you want to kick us off? Struggle, yeah, lightning round. How do people struggle? Go.
It's too much impact is bad. Focus on one thing, do it well. Don't try to do everything all at once.
Brilliant.
Sara. Yeah, like to that point, you may be doing a lot of different things and you want the full value of what you're doing to be captured, but that can easily swamp your effort. So I would agree, take it in chewable chunks, to quote a great mentor. Oh my gosh, her name, but she was at Calvert for a long time, chewable chunks, get started, and then you can build on that.
Amazing. And I would just add, make sure that there's an output. Spending a ton of time building out these sets and then not doing anything with it can really kill momentum in your organization. So have a plan. Don't get started without a plan. Okay, lightning round number 2. I think we've already talked about this, but I'd love to just do, a quotable mindset. Somebody asked a question, Rachel, about you're starting out, what's the mindset? What's the mantra that you would want people to walk into this work with who are starting their careers?
I think that we should be aware that if we're aspiring to change someone else's life, that we should be accountable to them for how we are doing that and whether that's happening in a way that is meaningful to them or not. So it goes back really to what Stefano said earlier about being of service first and really being curious about what's helpful to them. What about what we can do would be helpful to them? And, being in a partnership with the people whom we aspire to be helpful to.
Amazing. Stefano.
No, I agree. I think the mindset is you think of yourself as part of a bigger ecosystem, and it's a collaborative effort. So really find your place and find your team, and be prepared to serve others.
Amazing. Okay, and final lightning round question. Hopes for the future. Rachel, I think, shared this as well. Where do you see this all going, and how are you hoping that impact will continue to evolve? This could be a little longer. It doesn't have to be so lightning.
Stefano, you want to take that?
Yeah, there are so many places. I think we'd like to see a little more standardization across the field. I think that there are a lot of ideas, not all. I think we've reached the point where not all of them are good, and we can start curbing those down. So I think just a bit of standardization and a bit of maturation in the field around what social impact is and how to measure it would be fantastic, whatever way that is, whether that be a set of procedures. I think something that social enterprises struggle with is when different stakeholders want things measured different ways, creates a lot of additional work and effort that takes away from the actual social impact process. So if we could drill down, figure out one way or another, whether that be locking everyone in a room in a convention center and not letting them out until we've agreed on something or a set of principles, really reaching some standardization in the field and getting our heads together in the right place, I think would be phenomenal, not just for entrepreneurs and investors, who I'm sure are really desperate for some clarity, but also the beneficiaries of these enterprises.
Great. I have like a mental picture of everybody being locked in a room, and I think that should be something that BSEL puts together. I love it. Sara.
Well, and building on exactly what you just said, Stefano, I think one of the great breakthroughs has been the common approach to data that the Common Approach organization is championing out of Ottawa. Kate Ruff had this great insight that a standard of like an accounting standard only becomes a standard that's universally adopted if it has sufficient relevance, if the measures are sufficiently relevant to each individual user, which means that you can never come up with the list of metrics that are the right ones. You always have to accommodate that in a different context, this way of saying it, or this slight variation on the way of measuring it, is the right thing to do that makes it useful. And if we had to do it that way, we would not use it, or we would just make something up to make you happy. So we need what she calls bounded flexibility in our impact measurement. And that's what the Common Approach data standard and the Common Approach framework are all about. That great insight will allow us to progress in a way that I think has been slow in this field for exactly the reason that nobody wants there to be like a standard, because that means I lose the ability for this to be meaningful to me in my context for my purposes. And people will resist that till the cows come home. But if they know we can all understand basically where we're going and that we're getting somewhere, if we allow for a little bit of wiggle room, but we do need to all collectively know what's happening. That's what this framework enables. And so I think that knowing of that, learning it, using it, is a step in the right direction. I think in the future also we'll see more personalization in the sense it will be clearer what you need to know in order to be considered someone who knows what's up about impact. There will be more of a defined profession that, you know, so we won't, quite frankly, we will have fewer of these kinds of conversations where it's kind of this open question of like, how do we even do this? And we'll start knowing, okay, yes, there are these 10 things we all need to know to begin. And then we start having a deeper conversation about what does it really take? And I think we'll have to solve the incentives problem, where right now, because the benefit of a social impact thing happens to someone other than the party providing the resources most of the time, though not all of the time, there's an agency problem and there's an incentives problem. And until we've figured out how to cope with that, which is really about community and being accountable for together solving something that's going to benefit all of us, or even benefit those people over there and not me personally, like until we kind of return to humanity's roots, if I dare say, like we got to learn how to do things collectively, but in a way that's kind of capitalist sort of like that's where this is heading, I think. And hallelujah, you know, like great, we can do so much once we figure that formula out. And that I think is where we are heading now.
Brilliant. Well, that bounded flexibility, just to tie it in a bow, I think is at the heart of servant leadership, because to truly be a servant leader means that you actually believe and you want to see the thing come to being that you know must exist because it is just, because it must happen, because it must be. And so that wishing and that rooting is where I hope we all go. This has been such a beautiful conversation. I know it's 6:02. We could probably go another hour. Jill, do you want to bring us home, please?
No, fabulous. And this is such a timely, relevant conversation that, you know, I think Sara, you and I sat in one of your workshops back in, I think it was 2005, maybe, I believe, maybe almost 20 years ago. And you were doing a measurement workshop on social return on investment. So it keeps on evolving in the field, and such great advice and insights. I think everyone learned so much tonight. So Emily, Stefano, Sara, thank you so much. Thank you to the Jacobson family for supporting us and sponsoring us. Our next series and our last lecture series will be on April 9th, and it still has impact in it. So it's impact producing in film. April 9th from 5 to 6, and we'll be back in person on campus at USC. So thank you again. Big applaud for everyone. Thank you so much. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.